they said to me, I want my grandmother to be able to vote on a blockchain, ensuring like an incorruptible voting process. Right. And for me, that really stuck. Lido is governed on Aragon. What does that mean? It means that when they want to upgrade the Lido protocol, staked ETH, which, right now has over $40 billion worth of assets, right? The token holders actually vote to upgrade that with no trusted intermediary. And the same goes for Nepal here. Like, it's very exciting to see a group of young people putting up a vote for the next leader of the country on Discord, but like the reality is oh my God, like we don't actually want that to be a precedent. Like that is terrifying. Like Discord is not a secure, transparent voting, platform. And that's the pitfall of most organizations is imagine choosing one form of governance and assuming that will work for 100 years of your company. It makes absolutely no sense, right? You have to have flexibility. And we knew that. People were unable to get their assets out of the bank itself because the Lebanese government and bank were just like, we don't have the money. You're not getting it. Had those things been run on chain where these people were lending their assets or storing their assets, they could have gotten that out had it been a DAO. And that's my hope for the future is that coffee cooperatives in Colombia or wineries in South Africa or these types of things can all be governed on chain would be super cool for me.
This episode is sponsored by NIM, the world's most private VPN that protects your internet traffic and metadata. Unlike traditional VPNs, NIM uses a decentralized mixnet to scramble your internet data, hiding who you're talking to, when, and how often. You can switch between full mixnet mode for maximum anonymity or a faster VPN mode for everyday use. Pay in crypto or fiat, and even your payment stays anonymous thanks to ZK-powered anonymous credentials. Take back control of your online life at nim.com. Sign up today using the code blockchainsocialist and get an extra month for free.
Hi, everyone. You're listening to the Blockchain Socialist podcast, hopefully again. And I have today Leuts, the CEO of Aragon. You guys may know of the Aragon project as one of the first projects, I think, as far as I remember, in 2016, 2017, being focused on governance, specifically on Ethereum. It was one of the first projects I was really excited about when I was first getting into crypto and had lots of ideas about how the technology and smart contracts could be used. So it's really exciting to finally have someone from Aragon to come speak on the podcast. It's gone through several different phases and changes. So we can talk a little bit about that and see what is the current state of Aragon and what they've been up to, because they've released some interesting features, including private voting, which I think is really, really interesting to finally have that available on the Ethereum blockchain. But yeah, Leuts, would you like to give a quick introduction to yourself and what brought you into crypto and being CEO of Aragon?
Yeah, thanks so much. Really happy to be here and talk about where Aragon's at. I think, obviously, as you mentioned, Aragon has one of the longest histories on the Ethereum network, and right now is probably at the best state it's ever been in terms of adoption and usage, and that's really exciting. I joined, I joined a subsidiary of Aragon called Vocdoni in early 2021. I had been in crypto before that, but not working.
Friends of the podcast.
Exactly.
We were on Buckland was on a few months ago.
Wonderful. Yeah, they're a great team with just an incredible mission. So I was just with my team last week in person, and we were talking about like what are the use cases of crypto, what has like really stuck and held on longest, let's say, DeFi being the main one, but then the second one that we clearly saw was about, of course, ownership in general, and that leads us to think about like how things are owned, and voting is one of the main methodologies by which we make decisions. And Vocdoni has been a leader in blockchain-based voting since, dating way back 2017, and it's great to see them still forging on. But yeah, I originally joined Vocdoni and was really passionate about what they were trying to bring and their mission. And like TLDR was like very simple. It was like, they said to me, I want my grandmother to be able to vote on a blockchain, ensuring like an incorruptible voting process, right? And for me, that really stuck. And I still think that although it's not necessarily the sexiest or it's not the most money-making, let's say, although one could argue that corruption costs the world billions, if not trillions of dollars, but Incorruptible voting is a beautiful thing, and it's something that touches nearly everybody in the world. Even the first, I think it was the first time Donald Trump, for example, was voted into power. I think it was 60% of people didn't believe that that vote was like authentic, and that there weren't problems with the vote. And that's in the United States of America, right? Which is like,
Yeah.
has one of the strongest like democracies in the world. And so it goes to show you like how strong that mission was. And I really believed in that. And I was super excited about that. And that eventually led me to joining the Aragon team and sort of moving from Buckdoni to Aragon, which was working at this like deeper primitive level of ownership or control on the blockchain, and what people sort of just refer to as DAOs nowadays. Although I think there's a lot to unpack into what a DAO is and the sad reality of people not understanding what it is. But both organizations were very strong mission, vision driven and orientated. And even to this day, when we hire people, one of the main reasons they want to join the team is this extreme clear mission, and they want to bring value to the world and to this industry. And these are the organizations that are doing it. So that's why I joined Aragon, and I progressed sort of through the ranks, let's say, into taking over Aragon as the CEO about 2 years ago, really trying to create like strong fundamentals and trying to actually make Aragon itself sustainable, to generate revenue and to realistically build tooling that isn't just mission driven, but also actually like is grounded in usage by real people every day. And so we really focus on our users now and ensuring that they have the best tooling they need to succeed, which we can discuss in a moment. But yeah.
Yeah, sure. I mean, maybe a bit later, I would love to also pick your brain a little bit about the current situation in Nepal. Maybe
For
if
sure.
you're into the dialogue later. I forgot to add that into the questions, but next, before we get there, I think for context, maybe it'd be good to explain what exactly is Aragon and who is it made for.
Yeah, perfect. Great question. Let's start. So, Aragon is most famous for building what we now more refer to as access control, like an access control protocol or framework. This allows X person to do X action under X circumstance, really simply put. This is, we call governance in our industry, like this blanket term governance, right? It's like who controls and owns something. And directionally, as an industry, we've always pushed for things to be more decentralized. So the ownership of a protocol or something to be more decentralized from a security and safety perspective, right? And so we create that tooling to allow you to quickly, launch your organization. You can even launch your token on Aragon. You can distribute that token to people. You can manage your protocol upgrades. You can manage your treasury or funds, and you can do that through different methodologies. As I said, X person, can do X action or X circumstance. And so now, nowadays, and I'll talk a bit about it, like we've made it very modular and flexible. And so the point is, it's not just all token holders can vote on all proposals, and that happens. We've realized that doesn't work. It also doesn't mean that everybody has to be on a multi-sig, because that also might not work well either. And so it's allowing you to really design the governance for your organization so that you can govern different things, different permissions via the right people or right stakeholders, right? And then hopefully that helps you reach your goals, right? And then, of course, to drive value back to that, to whatever methodology you're using, so a token, for example, so that it has a value, so that when it's being used as your form of governance, that it actually has a lot of value and can be secure. Yeah, so that's the simplest. Like a good example is, so Lido is governed on Aragon. What does that mean? It means that when they want to upgrade the Lido protocol, staked ETH, which right now has over $40 billion worth of assets, right? The token holders actually vote to upgrade that with no trusted intermediary. And this makes it
Hmm.
very decentralized and very safe, which, Lido having so much ETH secured under, within its protocol is very, very important. For other projects, they may
Yeah.
want to insert trusted intermediaries, a multi-sig that can execute or not. Or like Tycho, who we're working with, they may want optimistic governance where only, only the protocol can be upgraded by the team, but then token holders can veto for safety. So we can design all these things like out of the box, no code, very easily for you to, and anyone to manage their protocol and their organization.
And is it, 'cause I imagine, you know, governance is a very wide range of different things. You could put an infinite amount of things that like are the variables for, what decide whether some action goes through or not. How did you guys account for like I guess the breadth of things that could be possible in that design?
Yeah, you're right. We are definitely the most broad, which is super tricky because the broader you get in what you offer, the more complex it can sort of be for users. But it was
Yeah.
extremely clear because we've been around since 2017 and we've worked with projects and we understand, we've learned from their pain points that the traditional methodology of just token holders voting on everything, I call it referendum-based governance, simply wasn't working. And sometimes multi-sigs were not strong or good enough as well, as you saw by the $1.5 billion, hack that was, happened to Bybit. So, so we thought, okay, we need to create what we call the governance designer, which really allows an organization to more customize their governance themselves. And what this could sort of look like very simply is like, okay, that for a protocol upgrade, the reality is that the only people who can understand what that payload would be upgrading it is really going to be developers as a whole, right? So maybe your stakeholders there are those developers, the ones who can put up a proposal, but you want to defend, your token holders. You want to defend the people in that protocol itself. So maybe providing them with a veto via the token is the best method. They don't need to vote every time there's a protocol upgrade. They don't have to, they just need to ensure that their funds are safe. And we do this through Morpho, for example, through guardians, like basically, and using like the deposit token. So for all their vaults, like the vault curator can create an upgrade, but guess what? The USDC depositors can actually decide to veto that upgrade if they want to defend themselves and exit. And that's all they're looking for, right? And that's very different from like a treasury based approach or a grants based approach or a growth based approach, where let's be frank, developers are probably not the right stakeholder to be the only ones initiating a movement of funds. Like that's typically finance people, it can often be growth people, it could be token holders themselves. And, they then could have the power to do that with the right checks and balances. And so right now within one project, we no longer have all token holders vote on everything, which just doesn't make sense for most case scenarios. And we don't have, multi-sig of team makes decisions, everything. We can have this style of governance, optimistic governance, as I mentioned, just for the protocol upgrade. And then we can have a different style of governance for the multi-sig all within one executor, one contract, or one organization. So you can start to really get granular about how actually an organization should be run and how its assets should be governed more appropriately. I hope that makes sense.
So then, so I'm just thinking like so you have to, if you want X to happen when some condition is met, the X that can happen would need to have a payload. It would need to have like the instructions of what gets triggered.
Exactly.
And I guess you guys make that payload can be whatever you want, I guess.
Yes.
And
any on-chain
okay.
action, basically, right? And that's why we really differentiate DAOs at Aragon as being completely on-chain versus this sort of more off the chain sort of voting and decision making, because at the end of the day, what we believe makes it decentralized, autonomous, especially, is that payload is on chain. There's no intermediary that needs to be in between the payload and the execution, right? Which is really important. And so, like, again, it could be a protocol upgrade, it could be a movement of funds that's done on chain, right? It could be the movement of an NFT, it could be upgrading code of, set of smart contracts, anything that is governed on chain, that's the X. That's what is the really important part that we allow you to execute on safely and securely with whatever methodology you want. So when we said buy X, it could be digital identification based governance, it could be multi-sig, it could be token holders, whatever that stakeholder uses on chain to signify themselves a wallet based address, right, as a multi-sig, they can do that and we can mix and match them together. That's the cool part. We have multiple governing bodies for one permission that needs to be upgraded or changed.
Okay. Um, yeah, there's a lot. We'll get more into that, but maybe one thing I think would be interesting to just kind of recount to also provide context for people is that, you know, you guys have gotten to this point because you guys have been around for a long time and you guys have been through, basically from the start, basically what DAOs ever were dreamed up to be to whatever they kind of were in the 2022, I want to say, period to what they are today. So I think it would be interesting just to recount a little bit of the history of Aragon. I mean, for me, I remember, it was the first Ethereum project working in governance, and I was really excited, and I bought I bought some ANT tokens because I was just like, at the time, I was like, fine, like at least there's one of these projects is working on governance because that was the thing that I was fascinated by. But yeah, would you like to maybe recount a little bit about that history and how the organization has grown and learned from it?
Yeah, there were two, very young visionary founders, and Luis and Jorge started. I think they started working together in like 2016, and then 2017 through 18 is when they started building on Ethereum. But back then, there wasn't a lot of tooling around. You had to create your own tooling to reach your own goals. And so, well, how do you like actually control something safely? Like way back then, like often it was like an EOA that would have control over things, somebody's wallet and their ledger, and so okay, well, they created these smart contracts, which we now call a DAO framework. It's what Aragon is like sort of famous for. It's what I was just describing, which is like it allows us to create this decentralized autonomous organization where we can as a collective govern and control and secure our protocol or assets. And they created that Aragon OS. This is the V1 version that Lido, Decentraland, Curve use still to this day. And then after that, they thought, okay, well, we need to now look into other mechanics for governance because, well, we don't think that this might be the only mechanic. So then, they had something called Aragon Govern, which was the first form of optimistic governance, which is becoming back in fashion now, which is really like a trusted party can put up a proposal only, and then token holders can veto if there's a problem. Otherwise, it passes organically or, automatically. And this makes things move faster and more efficient, which most, companies or organizations in crypto need is to still have like to move quite quickly. Um, and then there was the famous Aragon Court, which was like, okay, but what if there's like a disagreement over something? How can we like actually fully on chain, come to a solution over a disagreement? Claris is very famous for this and pushing it on. We deprecated ours years ago, which was, allowing sort of trusted to some degree third parties to adjudicate over disagreements and make a binding decision on chain who wins. So Aragon like created all these sort of like governance related products, I think, for themselves in a way, dog fooding, and which is what they became quite famous for. Then the team, obviously, everybody knows at that time split apart, and there was a couple years where the organization sort of, I would say, is in no man's land, and that's when I came in with my team, sort of picked up the flag and started running towards this new organization. This new Aragon. And that's where we reinvented the DAO framework to be modular, which is what I told you before, to really allow for a lot of flexibility. So you could design your governance safely, also to be future proof, because we saw that projects like Lido, Compound, these great OGs were sort of stuck in their DAO frameworks, and it was too dangerous to move or to add things, upgrade, quite challenging. And so we started building this new DAO framework, and now we have billions in TVL on this. We've got great clients, like Polygon, Tyco, that are using it. These famous rollups, and they really have been pushing the governance design space um, using this new framework. And that led us to like this year, I would say. So, we have that new framework. We now know how to help organizations create value, and now we want to distribute value back. Because what we've realized is right now there's a deep struggle for most projects to retain value in their token. If without value accruing to the token or without strong utility for the token, what happens is token holders start to sell the token. So the last 6 months to a year, we've been really focused on this, meta called token value accrual, and it's providing the infrastructure for organizations to drive the value that they create. Could be revenue, could be emissions, incentives, and to actually distribute that safely and securely to the token and thus token holders so that there's this long-term alignment. And Curve on Aragon really like ideated that first, I would say, with the VE gauge system, and that's really come back around now. This new VE gauge system, we have new projects like Katana, Pendle, even Athena with staking at least are really like trying to create long-term incentive alignment. So token holders hold the token long-term, participate in governance if required to secure what they're holding long term, and then to be rewarded for that. And this flywheel is becoming again quite popular, and we're sort of the leaders in offering this infrastructure for projects tokens, which is an integral part of governance or the safety and security of most organizations anyways.
Right, right. I mean, in many ways, it sounds like we've kind of come around a little bit full circle to, I mean, essentially what is like also fairly common in like corporate governance. I mean, that this is like a big part of how you want to keep your stock price high for some of them. But yeah, I'm skipping ahead a little bit. But with this token value accrual, I'm curious, is like what are some of those ways that happens? Is that like I would think like providing like revenue share would be like a major one, I guess, or one of them, but there are other ones as well.
Yeah, I would say there's two like main methodologies in industry. One is like a buyback and burn. So it usually involves buying back the token. And then there's buyback and distribute. One I would say is trying to more be focused on price at the expense of growth, and the other is more focused on price and growth. It's just a more complex system. Like a buyback and burn is a very easy system. Obviously, a organization simply buys back some tokens from the open market and then burns it. It's easy. It's not proven to be super effective, to be honest. Curve and Michael just put out quite a big paper about how they've played with both buyback and burn and buyback and distribute, buyback lock and distribute. And the buyback lock and distribute was a far superior system for locking supply and hopefully then creating sort of price support. And the other methodology, which is the VE gauge model, right? That's like the buyback lock. So token holders lock for X period of time. Used to be 4 years, now up to 4 years. Now it's quite flexible. Some projects have it as a day, 30 days, 1 year. It's like very customizable with our tooling. And then that locks obviously this token supply, and then they take the value that they've bought back with excess revenue or with emissions, and then some of that gets sent to token holders for allocating more of that budget to growth. That could be to new projects launching on a chain, and from a Katana perspective, could be adding liquidity from a Curve or Aragon perspective. So there's like different methodologies, but it's really focusing more on like long-term incentive alignment for growth. And those are the two main methodologies when we talk about token value accrual in the current state.
Okay, that's interesting. I want to get back on the modular governance framework that you're mentioning. So, what are some of the principles that you keep in mind when building out these types of new features? I feel like this is a kind of like the holy grail is modularity, and it's like after at least for me, spending quite some time building out various different apps and products, like building for modularity is not easy. For sure. To think about like in the future, what are the ways that your framework is potentially going to be used or not is it takes a lot of thinking actually. So I wonder what kinds of principles do you guys try to keep in mind whenever you're thinking about modular governance?
Yeah, we try and keep in mind a few things. One is to try and not make it overly complex to deal with. Like, monolithic, products are often a little easier to sort of build off of, launch on, get started. But where they fall or fail is usually later, when you need the modularity to adapt or change or be flexible. And governance has to be that. Like it's ridiculous to think that governance would never change. And that's the pitfall of most organizations is imagine choosing one form of governance and assuming that will work for 100 years of your company. It makes absolutely no sense, right? You have to have flexibility, and we knew that. And going about building that is quite challenging because it still needs to be simple, safe, and secure for the users. And these are very important core primitives. Like there's only three of them in the industry that have a ton of value on them. Safe, which is a monolith. It's a multi-sig monolith, very powerful, very good, very simple. The governor, opens up a governor sort of monolith, which is just token voting. Um, and then there's the Aragon modular stack, which, can like basically we have like this core primitive, which is the DAO, which is like the executor and the vault, right? And then you can plug in different modules or plugins, and these plugins allow you to govern using one or many plugins. So basically, you could take what is Governor, which we call our token voting plugin, and you can install that into enable token voting. You can install Safe or our own multi-sig, wallet-based voting. You can install that in also, and now you can, and then you can swap them if you want, right? So you can say, I want to move from a multi-sig to token voting. I'm just going to uninstall the multi-sig, and I'm going to install token voting, the modules, and then I'm off. And it's very simple. You don't change the executor. You don't change the core logic. You don't need to fork anymore and write more code, which creates security problems. So it's more future-proof in that sense. And we wanted to make sure that that could be done very securely and easily, because if somebody's changing their governance on the fly while they hold $1 billion, that has to be done relatively safely. So we wanted to make sure these modules were compartmentalized, and that we removed any, dependencies that could create sort of problems down the line. And so far, that's been a big success.
Right. So would that be like, maybe this is getting too much in the weeds, but is that like having almost like a wrapper around the treasury in some way that has parts that allow for modularity versus like an all-enveloping, system that then you have to remove to put another all-enveloping system, if that makes sense? Like you're creating kind of like plugs that you can just attach to and take off and attach the other things.
Exactly it.
So you have like
it's exactly
interfaces,
it.
I guess.
Yeah, exactly it. You have these plugins, and you allow to install or uninstall them using factories, and it makes it a much more stable sort of system, and more secure in that sense. It took some time to really come up with it and build it. But now that it's going, it also means that we get network effects, which has never happened before. So with monoliths, you can't have network effects. Like if you want to, use something, you have to fork it, you have to rebuild it, you have to change something, you have to audit it. It can cost, $20,000 to $100,000 to audit, and then you have your DAO. And if you want to change it, you have to touch the core logic, right? And make those changes and re-audit it. Well, with like a factory, based system that's modular, you inherit sort of the security, and you inherit the security of the other plugins that are created by other projects as well. So if Aragon creates a plugin for optimistic governance with Tycho, right, and we audit it, well, guess what? It doesn't need to be forked again. Any other DAO can simply choose to install that governance plugin into their DAO, and off they go. No need. It's already been audited. You don't need to change it. You just need to install it. And so we get what sort of is almost like a governance marketplace. You almost get this ability for projects to come in, choose sort of what governance methodology they want. Could be off of a very successful project, install it, and then customize obviously what they want in terms of quorum or these types of things, minimum threshold, etc. And then they're off. They are running, no cost, really fast, really easy, safe and secure, inherit the Lindy of the project before them. And so it's a more scalable system that we think can reach the mass audience. What we know is like we're not going to reach mass audience if every single person who needs to launch a company has to literally go and code something themselves or fork code of another project and then import that into a UI or build their own UI and get going. Like no organization in its early stage has the time for that. We need to make it really easy and quick for them to get going right off the bat.
Right. So, I'm curious, what is your vision for how people use, in the context of Aragon or just like kind of crypto governance in general, like what is your, your 5-year vision of like types of things that we're doing
Yeah,
and governing?
I envision projects coming in earlier to use Aragon OSX, the protocol, as their executor, because a lot of developers early on don't know what their governance is going to be in the future. And so what they usually do is they point all these permissions or they point the ownership or access control of this protocol, to a safe or somewhere, and then they need to change it in the future, and then they have to go start changing code within their protocol to make these changes in the future, and they have no idea what their governance is going to be, and that leads to risks down the line. So I do foresee in the next 5 years, developers start to use OSX as like the executor for their where they point their permissions earlier on, and then they can change their governance later. So it can be on a safe interacting with the Aragon OSX protocol early. And then guess what? They don't need to change anything within the code base later on. They can just simply change that safe to a DAO, token based, or to digital identification based, or a mix of both. And so that will mean it's safer and easier in the future for projects to actually just from day one offload this like decision of how to govern something, dictating it's going to be X, Y, or Z earlier on. And then, of course, are like we're very bullish, as I said, on the token value accrual. So like we've realized that like tokenized projects just aren't going to be successful if their token has no value because they use that token within their protocol. They often use it to fundraise, and they use it for any type of methodology. And we have to ensure that they're worth something. They have ownership and control something that they aren't just some ephemeral side thing that a founder launches and then leaves. And so we really believe that ensuring that at least that there's a plan for value to accrue to the token at some point that will give those buying tokens a reason to buy and hold them and potentially participate as well if need be with those tokens.
Right, right, right. I mean, this is, yeah. I mean, if within the context of the crypto space where so many tokens have gone to zero, because I guess they weren't able to find some kind of product market fit or find a reason for people to actually use their token. It is important to think about value accrual probably for a little bit so that your token doesn't go to zero and you lose the people who are supporting you in the first place.
Absolutely. And I think that like, the key is we have to create a system that's better than the traditional world. Like seeing projects like Circle, IPO, I think is a huge wake-up call, in my opinion, to our industry. It still means that that's
Right,
a better methodology, right? In general,
right.
we definitely want those types of projects to launch a token because I mean that's what we're here for. That's how we think we can democratize access to people being able to enter the market, participate in the market, and all create value together and grow together. That can only happen if it's easy for people to participate. But the IPO system isn't that easy for people to participate. They can't get in early enough. They have to get in too late often. It's usually already captured very early on by large conglomerates, large VCs, et cetera. So
Yeah.
like trying to really democratize access to this space is super important. And so we need to simply get the tooling to a better place where it's actually more advantageous to launch a token versus to IPO for big companies like that, or it's easier to quickly launch your project on chain rather than try and find a bank, launch it through like through lawyers and spend all those fees and go down this traditional route, which is very lengthy and tiresome and full of bureaucracy and high costs. Like the hope would be you come online, on chain. You can deploy your legal wrapper with MetalX, with Gabe Shapiro is quite well known. You can attach that to an Aragon organization where you can deploy your token and distribute it to those who have fundraised via Legion or Echo. And then you can build it safely. And then once you start creating a ton of value, you can reward your token holders back again, and this is like a system we see being infinitely better than the traditional market. I just don't think we're quite there yet in terms of the tooling, but we're getting closer and closer, honestly, every day.
Right. It is now that you're making me think about it, I am thinking about all the amounts of USDC that I've used over the years and how I'm going to get zero, zero out of it in their IPO probably.
Yeah,
The amount of people that have, yeah.
you probably did get zero, and now they're launching their own L1, as well
Yeah.
after having, the entire Ethereum community used and brought USDC up along with their team. They did great work, I'm sure, but like it was the Ethereum community that really got USDC, funded and full of liquidity and used all protocol everywhere, and I use USDC all the time. And now they've gone through an IPO and they're launching an L1. Like, where's the alignment there?
Yeah. Yeah.
Nowhere.
Yeah. That's a bit, yeah, unfortunate. I think, and and then we're seeing this is also. I think we had like a triple whammy. I think like a couple of weeks ago of like the Google one, the Stripe one, and this Circle one. I think are all different, basically corporate blockchains that they're trying to start.
Exactly. They're all L1s. I think they're all EVM compatible at the very least, which is, a positive for sure. But yeah, like, will the value be driven back to Ethereum? I think that's yet to be seen. There's, arguments on both sides. There's questions. There are positives to that kind of signaling. It very clearly means one of, two things. Like, I don't really fully believe that that technologically Ethereum L2s are not capable of doing that. Like, there's the latency issue, which is great for Ethereum to know that that's why, Tempo decided to go that route, and that Ethereum's roadmap can adjust to something like that, which is super important. But, it's probably still financially a better business decision to launch an L1. And, they wouldn't be like these smart people, they would not be launching L1s versus L2s if they didn't truly believe that it was a better business decision, whether that's technologically or monetarily. So, like, we need to get to a state where that it's just the best decision to make an L2. And I still think L2s are winning, but like, yeah, like, we have to keep learning and building as a community.
Yeah. What are your top bits of advice for organizations looking to do on-chain governance?
Yeah, my bits of advice are simply to be truthful and honest to what goals you're trying to achieve, and design your governance around that. Um, you know what I mean? I think often in the past, decentralization or was sort of done or fakely done in order to try and meet some type of random regulatory rules that were not very clear, or that what lawyers were trying to get them to do. And at the end of the day, like, that killed a lot of projects. Like, I think projects need to be
Hmm.
really focused on trying to create value through their product first and foremost, and their governance should be designed around that. And
Hmm.
after and once they decide to launch, a token, for example, or head down that route, that they meaningfully, decentralize in different methodologies. Again, like, you don't need to have a referendum-based voting for every decision. Like, you don't have to do that anymore, right? Like, you can provide security to your protocol with a veto. You can create a design space that is very efficient, that is, optimistic and optimized. And so, to really, like, do some research before you actually go ahead and just launch your token and claim to be decentralized. And then ensure that if when you do that, that it's meaningful and honest. And it's very clear, regulations in the United States at least are heading in this direction, and are going to force projects to actually decentralize if, the Clarity Act has anything to say about it. And it's a bit of a shame that it took the US regulatory system to sort of, like, create these requirements for projects that, we should have self-policed much earlier.
Right, right. I mean, do you think so? Then, I guess the question. So you mentioned earlier in the interview that you were hoping that developers choose to come to Aragon OSX earlier
Hmm.
in the process.
Yeah.
Does that mean that like this is also like thinking about on-chain governance is also important even before decentralization? Does that make sense?
They have to, like, literally,
Like
when
taking parts. Yeah.
when a developer builds their protocol, they have to decide who controls what. Like, you have to. And so, starting
Right.
earlier and baking in a system, and it literally just requires pointing an address to an Aragon DAO, which can be spun up no code. Like, doing that earlier means that you actually don't need to think about it from day one. You can have your multi-sig from day one, but later down the line that you can transition with no problems very easily and securely. So definitely my biggest advice is, like, come speak to us sooner than later, because it's a huge pain point that you're just pushing off till later that can be solved right now for free, no code, really quickly. It's just a bit of a different mindset than what has traditionally happened in the past, which is to be just
Hmm.
use, ownable and access control, sort of out of the box, and pointing it to, like, a multi-sig. So definitely would advise speaking to us earlier. We also support with, with helping you through your decentralization roadmap, and token value accrual and everything. So getting ahead of that before launching your token, before, opening up your protocol is definitely something I recommend.
So I'm curious to hear like what a lot of the things that I assume is that the types of organizations that are using Aragon for the most part, the most at least, are ones that are kind of like product based or that have a some sort of product that they run that is a for profit business or something like that. But what I'm curious to hear is your dream type of organization to use Aragon. I mean, one of the things that I've kind of seen, or like one of the interesting bits of history about DAOs for me is that like it used to be called Decentralized Autonomous Corporation. That was like the first. It was DAC at first.
Yeah.
That was the first acronym before Vitalik made the wise bit of a suggestion to change it to DAOs, since the idea of using kind of automatically executing code with value in it, that it doesn't necessarily have to be a for-profit corporation or something like that. And this was, I think it was like just a testament kind of to certain libertarian ethics of some of the earlier people who decided that, and I think that kind of limited their imagination a little bit. But I think like by now that kind of like idea has, I think most people who are in DAOs have a belief that it shouldn't be just for-profit entities that do this, but like any other types of organization broadly. So I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are on what are some of these dream types of organization, and is Nepal one of them?
Oh, great point. Yeah, I mean, yes is the answer. So I think where immutable slash decent or decentralized access control works the best is in adversarial situations. Like in Switzerland, do I need to run my organization as a DAO? Depends, but not as much. Like we have very clear, strict legal rules that people can follow. The code, code is law, it's all followed here. There's a great system, it's low corruption. For the most part, as it stands currently, things work very well in this country. But where I think DAOs should have and could have been utilized the most is in, adversarial, geographic locations where that isn't the case, um, where you can't trust a government, or you can't trust intermediaries to to have your best interest at heart. And that could very well be a group of freedom fighters in Ukraine, in the Donbass, where Russia have taken over this land, trying to manage their assets together without a local bank taking them. Or speaking of banks, in Lebanon, where people were unable to get their assets out of the bank itself, because the Lebanese government and bank were just like, we don't have the money, you're not getting it. Had those things been run on chain where these people were lending their assets or storing their assets, they could have gotten that out had it been a DAO, right? Nobody could have stopped them, right? And the same goes for Nepal here. Like, it's very exciting to see a group of young people putting up a vote for the next leader of the country on Discord. But like the reality is oh my God, like we don't actually want that to be a precedent. Like that is terrifying. Like Discord is not
Yeah,
a
yeah.
secure, transparent voting, platform. And it's exactly in these types of situations where you could easily have corruption actually, change the inputs of the vote. And anyways, because no power could actually be executed by the vote in Discord, it really was up to the military to decide whether or not they wanted to take this 200-person vote and enact it on, the entire population. And so there was no power or control of money or of power. It was simply just like, yeah, 200 people voting on Discord, and the army saying, okay, well, like we'll do it. And it's like, geez, like, so like, yeah, like
Yeah,
this
yeah.
would have been a perfect case scenario where transparent votes would have been, incorruptible, where you could have seen who voted on what. And with, privacy in play there, you could have known that this person voted for this, but not actually tied the vote together and knew what they voted for from a privacy perspective. But you could have known that those votes really mattered and counted, and nobody could have, like, censored them or censored some people or changed the outcome of the vote. And then if it was actually moving money or like giving access, let's say that if government posts were controlled on chain, like what they could access to do their jobs, Well, by giving access control to the president or prime minister, to actually log in, and execute on certain actions would have been very powerful. Obviously, we were not at that state yet, but you get my point. These are the types of
Mm-mm.
times when a DAO and these decentralized access control mechanisms would play perfectly, and that's my hope for the future. Is that like, coffee cooperations in cooperatives in Colombia, or or wineries in South Africa, or these types of things can all be governed on chain. It would be super cool for me.
Yeah, yeah. Just a note on the Nepal situation is gonna be. I mean, my video editor is from Nepal, so I've been talking to him quite a bit about the situation. So it's really really interesting. And I got I got a little bit of flack for some people on Twitter because they take my tweets too seriously. But I with the Discord situation, I was just able to enter the Discord. I had never been to Nepal. I don't know. I don't speak the language at all. Didn't check. There's no Sybil resistance.
Yeah.
I mean, so in some sense, so it's like interesting. It's interesting for me at least, to where I'm like, I was able to take a tiny part in that history of being in the Discord, and seeing everything in English was interesting. Like what? So at first it was kind of like raised a little bit of a red flag in Nepal. Why is everything in English? But my video editor told me that like a lot of them, they do speak English online for whatever reason. That's like fairly common, so that might be part of it. But yeah, there's a lot of like open questions of like, who exactly is behind the nonprofit that's running a lot of these things. Like I don't really know. I'm not trying to take away necessarily their work if it's good work, and I also don't want to like be super trusting if there's people I don't know. So there's a lot of like these open questions that we can't say, and like Discord is an American owned business that has zero accountability to
Yeah.
Nepali people. So like why, for me, I was like pushing back a little bit online to people talking about that Nepal is now a DAO and it's governed by a DAO. I just think like we should have much higher standards than this. I mean, it's a still a fascinating thing that's happening. But come on, it's not a DAO. Let's be honest with ourselves that
Yeah.
that didn't happen.
Yeah.
Maybe it could happen in the future, but it didn't happen right now.
No, definitely not. I mean,
Um,
I actually think I made the joke. I said Nepal DAO quite early on as like literally a joke, because the jokes in the past have been DAO equals Discord is like the biggest
yeah, yeah,
meme of the DAO world, which is just like DAO equals Discord. And I was like, here we go. A country just voted their new leader in Discord. It's got to be a DAO. So for me, it was definitely tongue in cheek. Now I get it. Like there's a lot of revolutionary people, in our industry and online on Twitter, and it's it's exciting to see young people come together and overthrow a government and try and make change. But like, yeah, like if we're being real here, whoa, we definitely don't want, to choose leaders of governments on Discord. Certainly not,
yeah,
and if it's in English,
yeah,
like I guarantee you, like I don't know how many Nepalese people are, in their 70s living in the countryside who should have actually participated in that vote, or in that Discord speaking English.
yeah.
Like who knows, right? So yeah, it's not really a great sign, to be honest. But I think what I like about it is there seemed to be a lot of optimism, at least from an external perspective looking in,
Sure.
getting rid of corruption and trying to move that forward. And I put out a tweet, and Gabe Shapiro was like, okay, you need to go do this. I was like, oh my God, which was like, yeah, like if people seriously, if anybody watching this, like seriously knows people on the ground there who can put us in touch with the right people, we've moved far enough in this industry that we could definitely start some pilot programs in Nepal to actually have blockchain-based voting there and just start to try and move that needle forward. It's possible, and we
Yeah.
definitely want to be involved and help out. Like this is a great use case.
I mean, it's like, yeah, it's fascinating, fascinating situation. I mean, it's really interesting that they voted in. Apparently, from what I understand, the new prime minister is like an older woman who was like the chief justice, who was like one of the you know people who were fighting against corruption. I think in the 2010s.
Yeah.
So she does have that background in her. So it'll be interesting to see how things pan out. Will she be? It'll be interesting. I mean, you know, I think I would be fascinated to see like a 70-year-old be like, let's use blockchain now. But would be very cool. I mean, I think would be very interesting, and I think those are the types of contexts and situations where you're really putting things to the test. I mean, there's definitely when it comes to corporate like governance. It's definitely a test there, but I think this is like
Yeah.
it's a different beast, a different level. I'm sure.
Yeah.
I'm sure you probably know that from like Vakdani
Exactly.
experience as
That's
well.
exactly what we were doing at Voctoni. Doing some, like, we did some
Yeah.
towns in Spain, did some big votes like FC Barcelona, but like, yeah, there was definitely a thought on like how can we build a system where literally a country can do their election on the blockchain. The issue is from like an incentive perspective, like the people in power in the countries who need that technology the most are the least incentivized
Mm,
to actually implement it. I
mm,
actually spoke with a friend of a friend who has a position of power in a large country that's not known for or is quite well known for its corruption. And I pitched the idea and I was like, blockchain-based voting, like incorruptible, like isn't this really cool? Something, and he was like, why would we want that? It's like, okay.
like very upfront. Like,
Yeah.
how am I supposed to
Yeah, I
cheat
can't
the
benefit. I
system
can't
then?
benefit off of this. This is the opposite of what I want. I was like, okay, fair enough. Well, okay, we'll have to. This has to come through revolution, clearly.
Yeah, yeah. That's interesting. Yeah. But like I think in the context of maybe one of the last questions I wanted to talk to you about, thinking about this context as adversarial context, I think one of the other risks as well of using blockchains for voting is that if your vote is publicly accessible, then that could be a liability in the future, right? You don't want necessarily who you voted for in the last election to be public for everyone to see, to which you can be held, I don't know, culpable for whatever reason because you voted against the winning party or whatever in certain countries or contexts. So like one of the things that has to be done more or less to do that is private voting. And so from what I understand, one of the latest features that you guys released was the ability to do private voting on Aragon using Macy, I believe.
Yeah,
Minimal something collusion
minimal anti-collusion
something.
infrastructure. Yeah, yeah.
Yes. Um, so yeah, would you like to share a bit about this feature and maybe nerd out a little bit on like the technology behind it and its implications?
Yeah, so we're super, super happy to have announced private voting with Macy. It's definitely in beta, like it's a V1, but nonetheless, it's something that's been missing from our industry for years, and Aragon has worked in the past on for years as well. We had a really great proof of concept with Aztec a couple of years ago, but there were always significant trade-offs to having private voting. And I think back in the
Mm,
day, we were so purist in what we wanted to build that we wanted to build the most, like decentralized private voting solution, no trade-offs attached. There's no such thing. And
mm.
so the trade-off at the time was you had to pay like
Right.
$80 a gas to actually vote. So it didn't really run
Wow.
with it. So this time with Macy, they were able to build a governance plugin, as I said, which can just be installed into a DAO quite easily and use their system to, computate the votes and to hide them, obviously, so that when somebody votes, it's private and that nobody else voting can see what they voted. And it's super exciting. It uses homomorphic encryption, ZK proofs, um, to basically ensure that this person voted on this, but that you can't see it, but that you can actually see, know that they can actually know what they voted on. So that's like what's super important is like before you would lose yourself in the fact that you could make something private, but then you wouldn't actually know what you voted on. There was no validation of that. And so it makes you can sort of decide, do you want to have it to be basically without a receipt or with receipt? So like without a receipt, meaning like there's like it's bribe proof. So you can't show anybody, there's no proof of what you actually voted on so that somebody could be bribed to vote on such. So like it tries to tackle several things at once, which
Mm,
nobody's really discovered. And the good thing is now we have this V1 up, and it allows people to like come in, no cost. It's not expensive to vote. It's maybe a little more than normal gas prices. They have to sign up for a vote beforehand, and then they can participate and actually vote privately. And it's like the biggest thing missing in the governance space. Um, the problems that have arisen from a lack of private voting is everybody just seems to vote yes in every DAO. One could say. Like people seem to
mm,
follow the herd or the famous people, not wanting to go
mm.
against whoever might have more power. Another thing is people don't want to be caught dissenting, right? Like, and then it's very clear they dissented, and then there might be repercussions to that. Um, and then people like VCs who are often large token holders, let's be honest, if we're just being completely honest, are too scared to vote from a regulatory perspective or from being sued based on a decision. And so what that has led to is the offboarding of hard power and decision making from token holders to delegates. And just like every system in crypto, if it gets gamed, if it's not foolproof, and just like that, the sort of delegate system has been gamed, where you just have a bunch of serial delegates who have no skin in the game themselves. They may not even hold one token of a project, but because they're famous or popular, or because they were first or whatnot, they have tons of voting power. And when you don't have incentive alignment and you have decision making, you often have the wrong decisions being made. And so the space has really suffered from that. So we want to make sure that people can vote safely from a legal and regulatory perspective, that they aren't coerced by other people and don't feel like they, have to vote on something without reprisals. And that's what private voting can bring.
I wonder if part of that also has to do with simply like token voting being kind of part of the issue, part of the issue there as well. But part of it's probably a bigger issue even in like identity-based voting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Token, but I mean, there's trade-offs to everything, right? Like if you did a one person one vote, congratulations. Like, great, everybody has equal say, but then that disincentivizes, people from potentially investing or being involved in a project because those with less skin in the game have the same power as somebody with more skin in the game. With tokens, you have obviously sometimes too much skin in the game skin in the game is the only requirement from like a financial perspective. So those who are richer have more power and thus can sort of dictate
Yeah.
terms. So there's a trade-off to every single governance, basically. Um, so I
Yeah.
think getting the incentives right is really important, and one step of that is ensuring people can vote safely and without fear.
Yeah. I guess the polity is kind of like super important in determining this as well. Whether I think crypto just generally has, if it's a crypto project, then you're creating a polity via the token.
Hmm.
Versus, I think one of the things that, at least for me, would be super interesting is like, I mean, in the case of Nepal, there are people who are Nepalese. Obviously, if we turn Nepal into a DAO, then everyone having a single vote would make a lot of
Yeah.
sense. But also, I mean, and this is the case for large cooperatives or large labor unions. I mean, having one member, one vote is kind of it's more or less the norm in those type of situations as well. But they already have a polity in place. That's not necessary. Like in those type of cases, that's where crypto is kind of like an extension rather than kind of like being enveloped in it. But I think it's slightly different. Um, but yeah, definitely get your point.
Totally. No, I totally
Depends
agree.
on where you are in
It,
that.
it, it, every organization needs to govern itself to some degree a little differently. You have to decide how you want to reach your goals and what incentives you want to put in place for people to make the right decisions. And that's just the nature of the beast. And I think we've struggled in crypto because it's always been an afterthought, instead of a forethought. And to be honest, like it's such a nascent, fast-moving space. There's just like very conflicting challenges from a governance perspective of moving fast, but being super secure, but giving power to people who should have power because they are technically the owners, versus then being focused. And there's just these like very challenging trade-offs. And it's the entire purpose of modular governance is to like segment what decision needs to be made and empower different stakeholders to make those different decisions within one organization, and hopefully that can solve the issue. But it's look, governance is like thousands of years of humans trying to discover the best way to govern things, and like obviously this just can't be done overnight. And we, hubris, like we as an industry can't just try and turn everything on its head and hope that it turns for the best. But I think we've done a good job of at least experimenting. So hopefully that
Yeah.
helps.
I mean, I've definitely I've solved governance. I have it in my it's in my notebook. I just haven't shared it with everyone
Put it
yet.
on chain. Let's go.
All right, so thanks so much for coming on, Lutz. Really appreciated you sharing your knowledge and your experience with Aragon. Maybe the last thing, if you want to share with people where they can keep up with your work with Aragon, what are your plugs?
Yeah, obviously Leuts.eth. You can find me on Twitter. I always talk Aragon. I talk everything about our industry. www.aragon.org. If you need to learn more about Aragon, if you want to reach out, you can do so via there or to me on Twitter, and we'll help you with anything you need help with, whether it's tokenomics, token launching, governance, access control. We're here to help you. We want the projects built on our stack to succeed, and really appreciate your time as well in this podcast. It's really great.
Cool. Catch you later. Thanks.